My name is Brenna Caldwell, and at 31 years old, I considered myself a fixture in the sprawling, sometimes chaotic ecosystem of our Midwestern university. For 7 years, I had navigated the intricate world of student housing, my office a quiet sanctuary on the second floor of Hawthorne Hall, an all-female dormitory. My role often felt less like a job and more like a calling. I saw myself as a system enforcer, a quiet guardian of the university's code of conduct. I believed in fairness, in upholding the rules not just for discipline, but for the collective good. My mind was methodical, discerning, always observing, always cataloging. I prided myself on my professionalism, a shield against the endless parade of petty grievances and dramatic pronouncements that define dorm life. My mornings always began with a ritual: a cup of black coffee, the soft hum of the university's online portal, and a review of the day's scheduled maintenance requests and student check-ins. Hawthorne Hall, a grand, if slightly worn brick building, was usually a hive of activity, but at 8 in the morning a hushed reverence still held sway. It was a time for quiet thought, for planning the day's tasks, for appreciating the fragile peace before the first wave of student questions hit. I was not one for grand gestures or overt displays of authority. My influence was subtle, built on a reputation for impartiality and a deep, almost encyclopedic knowledge of university policy. I had seen countless students come and go, observed their triumphs and their tribulations, and always sought to apply the rules with a steady, unwavering hand. Weaponizing policies for personal vendettas was, in my book, one of the cardinal sins of dorm life. It was a breach of trust, an undermining of the very structure I worked so diligently to maintain. This core belief, a quiet conviction that simmered beneath my professional exterior, would soon be put to the ultimate test. One late afternoon, the heat of an early summer day still clinging to the air, I found myself in a state of comfortable dishabille within the confines of my own dorm room, a small but functional space adjacent to my office. I wore a simple white tank top and a pair of soft pajama shorts, the kind of attire perfectly acceptable for an unannounced dash down the hall. I needed to refill my water bottle, a small, insulated canteen that was an extension of my arm. The hallway, usually bustling, was unusually quiet, save for a small knot of students gathered outside room 207 about 10 yards from my door. They were laughing, their voices muted, and I barely registered their presence. My mind was on the report I'd just finished compiling, a detailed analysis of the previous semester's student housing survey. I wasn't thinking about appearances, I was simply focused on the mundane task of hydration. I walked the short distance to the water fountain, the cool tile of the hallway a welcome respite from the warmth of my room. The tank top was fitted, yes, but not in any way sheer. The outline of my nipples was subtly visible, a natural consequence of wearing a thin fabric without the added bulk of a bra. It was a fleeting, unremarkable moment. I refilled my bottle, the gurgling sound echoing faintly in the quiet hall, and turned to head back. As I passed the group outside room 207, I made polite eye contact with one of the girls, a tall, striking blonde I recognized from a few orientation events I'd overseen. Her name, I vaguely recalled, was Clara. She offered a hesitant, almost nervous smile. I returned it, thinking nothing of it, and retreated into the sanctuary of my room, the weighty sense of administrative tasks still lingering in my mind. The entire interaction lasted mere seconds, a fleeting blip in the rhythm of my day. I sealed the door, the click of the lock a familiar punctuation mark, and settled back into my work, convinced that the incident, if it could even be called that, was entirely unremarkable. About half an hour later, a soft, tentative knock echoed on my door. I frowned slightly, surprised. Most students would simply call or email. Opening the door, I found Clara standing there, a strange, almost apologetic expression on her face. Her eyes darted from my face to my chest, then back up again. "Hey, Brenna," she began, her voice a little too sweet, a little too saccharine. "So sorry to bother you, but if you go out into the hall again, could you, put a bra on? My boyfriend's out there," and he was staring a little so. A flicker of annoyance, swift and sharp, pierced through my professional composure. This was a direct, albeit veiled, comment on my attire, delivered with a thinly veiled implication of impropriety. My discerning eye immediately noted the subtle, manipulative undertone. It wasn't a request for modesty, it was an imposition, a judgment, but my non-confrontational default kicked in. I was too steeped in the university's culture of diplomacy, too accustomed to de-escalating rather than igniting. "Oh," I managed, a touch of surprise in my tone. "Yeah, sure, sorry about that." My apology felt hollow, a forced pleasantry designed to end the awkward encounter. For the rest of that evening, a subtle shift occurred within me. Each time I left my room, whether for the bathroom or a late-night snack run, I made sure to pull on a sweater or a light jacket over my pajamas. It was a small concession, a petty capitulation to an unspoken judgment, but it gnawed at me. I told myself it was for the sake of peace, for the sake of avoiding further awkwardness. But deep down, a seed of resentment had been planted. I thought that was the end of it, a minor misunderstanding, a fleeting moment of discomfort. I was wrong. The initial promise of a simple, resolved issue was about to unravel, pulling me deeper into a conflict I hadn't anticipated. The question lingered: why had Clara felt the need to say anything at all? And what precisely was she implying? Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. The next morning, the fragile piece of my resolution shattered. My roommate, Sarah, a bright, observant student who often picked up on the subtle currents of dorm gossip, returned from the communal bathroom with a strange look on her face. Her usual chipper demeanor was replaced by a quiet intensity. She sat on the edge of her bed, carefully arranging a stack of textbooks before turning to me, her voice low. "Brenna," she started, "I just overheard something in the bathroom, about you." My stomach tightened. The seed of resentment I thought I'd buried began to sprout, thorny and unpleasant. "Clara was in there with a few of her friends," Sarah continued, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and indignation. "She was telling them about you, about yesterday, but..." She was making it sound completely different. I felt a cold dread creep through me. My professional exterior, usually impenetrable, began to crack. "Different how?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully as if recounting a scene from a poorly written drama. "She was making it sound like you were purposely trying to seduce her boyfriend. Like you were wearing basically nothing and taking your sweet time at the water fountain and posing to push out your tits, the whole works." Sarah's imitation of Clara's sneering tone was disturbingly accurate. "And when she left the bathroom," Sarah added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "she was actually acting it out at the water fountain, pretending to be you, giggling with her friends about it." A hot wave of indignation washed over me, quickly followed by a chilling sense of betrayal. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a malicious fabrication, a deliberate distortion of a harmless moment. My face flushed and I felt a tremor run through my hands. To be accused of such a thing, to have my professionalism, my very character, slandered in such a crude, public way ignited a slow-burning fury within me. My methodical mind immediately began dissecting the incident, replaying it, searching for any hint of truth in Clara's vile narrative. There was none. My discerning eye saw only malice. That night, the casual atmosphere of the dorm hallways felt charged, hostile. As I headed to brush my teeth, already in my pajamas, braless as was my habit for such a short journey, I saw Clara and her little coterie of friends emerging from their room. Their laughter, initially loud, abruptly ceased as they saw me. Clara's eyes, cold and sharp, dropped pointedly to my chest, a smirk playing on her lips. Then, as if on cue, all of them started giggling, a brittle, mocking sound that echoed in the quiet hall. It was a calculated, deliberate act of public humiliation, designed to remind me of her manufactured narrative, to reinforce the false impression she was so gleefully spreading. The incident confirmed everything Sarah had said. Clara wasn't just spreading rumors, she was actively reveling in my discomfort, leveraging a baseless accusation to assert some warped sense of superiority. The professional in me wanted to address it, to correct the record, to apply policy, but the human in me was seething. This wasn't just about a tank top, it was about character assassination, about the deliberate weaponization of a trivial situation into a public shaming. The final straw, the one that shattered any remaining fragments of my non-confrontational facade, arrived the next day. An email, stark and impersonal, landed in every student's inbox, including mine. It was from the resident advisor, the RA for our floor, a diligent but sometimes overwhelmed junior named Maya. The subject line read, "Important reminder, hallway attire and dorm conduct." My heart pounded in my chest as I clicked it open. The first paragraph was a generic reminder about maintaining a respectful living environment. But then came the kicker. "I've received some anonymous complaints recently regarding individuals dressing inappropriately in the hallways. While we value personal expression, we also ask that everyone ensure they're keeping things covered up out of respect for their fellow residents and the university's community standards." Anonymous complaints, inappropriate dressing, my blood ran cold. There was no doubt in my mind, this was Clara. She hadn't just gossiped, she had escalated. She had taken her petty, fabricated grievance and weaponized the university's official channels, twisting a minor personal discomfort into a formal, albeit anonymous, accusation. This wasn't just a personal slight anymore, it was an affront to the system I upheld, a misuse of the very policies I was sworn to enforce fairly. My motivation, my core belief in equitable conduct, surged to the forefront of my mind. My role as a system enforcer, always quietly present, now demanded action. The feeling of outrage was palpable, a burning coal in my chest. I felt a profound despair, a sense of helplessness that someone could so brazenly manipulate the system. But beneath the despair, a consuming anger began to coalesce, sharp and clear. How could someone so flagrantly disregard the spirit of fair play? How could they use anonymity as a shield for their malicious lies? This wasn't just about my dignity, it was about the integrity of the dorm's environment, the very trust between residents and staff. The initial question, why Clara did what she did, was answered. She was a bully, using the system to exert control. Now a new question emerged, one that pulsed with newfound urgency. What would a methodical, discerning, professional system enforcer do when the system itself had been used against them in such a vile way? The progression of Clara's malice had pushed me to my rock bottom, a place where anger eclipsed all other emotions, demanding a strategic, carefully planned response. The days that followed the Ra's email were a blur of simmering indignation and quiet calculation. I felt a constant, low-grade hum of anger beneath my skin, a feeling foreign to my usually calm demeanor. It wasn't a wild, explosive rage, but a methodical, precise fury, like a well-oiled machine building pressure. My professional mask felt heavier, tighter. Every interaction in the hallway, every casual glance felt imbued with Clara's judgment. I observed her more closely, my discerning eye picking up on subtle cues. She seemed to swell with self-importance, a smug satisfaction emanating from her whenever she passed me. Her friends, a gaggle of sycophants, would often giggle behind cupped hands. The public humiliation, subtle as it was, felt like a constant prod. My attempts to simply let it go failed spectacularly. The incident had become an insidious itch under my skin. I reread the Ra's email countless times, dissecting its carefully worded phrases. Anonymous complaints, inappropriate dressing. It was so vague, so open to interpretation, yet so clearly aimed at me. It struck at the very heart of my professional identity. I prided myself on maintaining a neutral, fair environment. Now I was the subject of a complaint that, while not explicitly naming me, was clearly understood by those involved. It undermined my perceived impartiality, making me feel like a rogue element rather than a trusted staff member. The injustice of it was a bitter taste in my mouth. I tried talking to Sarah about it again, seeking some form of validation, but she just offered sympathetic glances and vague assurances that Clara was just a jerk. It wasn't enough. My methodical mind craved a solution, a way to restore balance. I considered going to Maya the Ra directly, but what would I say? Clara is lying about me wearing a bra and she used your anonymous complaint form to do it. It sounded petty, unprofessional, and besides I had no proof, only Sarah's secondhand account and Clara's snide behavior. My hands were tied, or so it seemed. The frustration mounted, pushing me closer to a breaking point. I felt trapped in a net of false accusations, and my usual professional tools were useless. During this period of intense frustration, my analytical mind began to wander, to connect seemingly disparate pieces of information. My job, after all, was to know the rules, to understand the intricate web of university policies. I reviewed the student handbook, not with the intention of finding a loophole for myself, but to better understand the mechanisms that Clara had so cynically exploited. It was during this deep dive into the official documents that something clicked, something I'd known intellectually but hadn't connected to Clara's specific situation. It was a detail I'd catalogued months ago during her orientation, a tidbit she'd shared in a casual conversation with me during a dorm sign-up event. Her boyfriend, she'd mentioned proudly, didn't go to the university. He was a student at a community college in a neighboring town. My methodical brain began to whir, piecing together the threads. Clara's boyfriend was frequently in the dorm. I had seen him many times in the hallways, loitering outside Clara's room or accompanying her to the communal kitchens. He was a constant presence, a shadow in the periphery of my daily rounds. And then there was the lingering effect of the pandemic. University policy, still technically in effect, had strict guidelines about non-student guests in the dorms. Due to public health concerns and to minimize traffic, non-student, non-family guests were explicitly prohibited. The rule wasn't always stringently enforced, but it was there, a line in the sand, and something else. Masks were still mandatory in all common areas, hallways included. While compliance had waned, it was still a university-mandated rule. Clara's boyfriend, I distinctly recalled, was almost never masked in the hallway. My discerning eye had noted all these things before, but they had merely been observations, not actionable intelligence. Now they took on a new significance. Clara, the self-appointed enforcer of modesty, was herself in violation of multiple, clearly defined university policies. She had anonymously complained about my attire, an ambiguous issue at best, while flagrantly disregarding concrete rules regarding guests and masks. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The anger, once a simmering heat, began to solidify into a cold, determined resolve. This wasn't just about my personal grievance anymore. This was about the integrity of the system, about the unfair weaponization of policy, and about someone breaking clear rules while demanding others adhere to vague interpretations. My motivation to uphold the university's code of conduct fairly demanded I act. I had a low tolerance for weaponizing policies for personal vendettas, and Clara had done precisely that. My role as the system enforcer, always quiet, always behind the scenes, was about to be unleashed. I would not descend to Clara's level of public shaming. No, I would use the system, the very system she had misused, to deliver a precise, impactful counterstrike. My vengeance would be a matter of policy, a subtle enforcement that would resonate far beyond my personal humiliation. The rock bottom of public shaming and helplessness was now transforming into a forge of strategic planning. I would turn her weapon back on her, and I would do it with the same anonymity she had enjoyed, leveraging my intimate knowledge of the university's bureaucratic labyrinth. The path to ultimate retribution, to the precise, undeniable vindication of my character, was becoming clear. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. The transformation was complete. The initial shock, the public humiliation, the grinding frustration, all of it had coalesced into a laser-sharp focus. I was no longer the non-confrontational staff member who would merely apologize to keep the peace. I was Brenna Caldwell, the methodical, discerning professional, now fully embracing her role as the system enforcer. My anger had cooled into a strategic calm, a deep well of resolve. I had reached rock bottom, and from that depth a new clarity emerged. This wasn't just about Clara's malice, it was about upholding the very principles I dedicated my professional life to. She had weaponized ambiguity, I would weaponize clarity. My plan began to form, precise and logical like a well-structured academic paper. The university had an anonymous feedback form, a digital submission portal designed to allow students to report concerns without fear of reprisal. It was the same form Clara had undoubtedly used to lodge her complaint about inappropriate dressing. I knew this form intimately. I had helped design its user interface years ago. I knew its subtle quirks, its methods for de-identifying submissions, and how complaints were routed. My revenge would be executed with surgical precision, leveraging this very tool. I retreated into my office one evening, the fluorescent lights humming softly, casting long shadows. My computer screen glowed, reflecting the intense concentration on my face. This wasn't a spontaneous act of fury, it was a deliberate, calculated maneuver. I opened the anonymous complaint form, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I didn't want my complaint to appear petty or personal, even anonymously. It had to be framed as a legitimate concern for campus safety and adherence to policy, echoing my core motivation to uphold the code of conduct fairly. I began to type, crafting each sentence with the precision of a legal brief. I described the frequent presence of an unidentified male guest in the hallways of Hawthorne Hall, specifically citing multiple instances of him being unmasked. I noted that this was in direct contravention of the university's standing guest policy for dorms, which I cited by section number as a true professional would, and the mandatory mask mandate in common areas. I did not mention Clara or her boyfriend's identity. I did not mention my own prior interaction. I kept it objective, factual, and strictly policy-oriented. My goal was not to get Clara in trouble for my bra, but for her actual verifiable policy violations. I was a system enforcer, not a gossipmonger. The complaint was not short. I detailed dates and times I had observed the unmasked guest, though vaguely enough to avoid suspicion. I even alluded to the potential health and security risks of non-student guests, subtly amplifying the importance of enforcement. This wasn't just a petty complaint, it was a well-reasoned argument for policy adherence, framed as a concern for the wider student body. My discerning eye for detail, my methodical approach to problem-solving all contributed to the meticulous construction of this digital document. It felt right, a quiet vindication. I hit submit. The digital form vanished, a silent echo in the university's servers, and I felt a profound sense of anticipation. The trap was set. The next few days were a strange mixture of tension and quiet observation. I continued my rounds in the dorm, interacting with students and staff as usual, but now with a heightened awareness. I watched Clara, observing her movements, noting the continued presence of her boyfriend, still unmasked, still loitering. A small smile played on my lips internally. They were oblivious, continuing their blatant disregard for the rules, all while having instigated an anonymous complaint about something so subjective. The irony was a delicious, silent victory, and then it came. Another email from the raw Maya landed in my inbox. This one, unlike the last, sent a jolt of satisfaction through me. The subject line, urgent, reinforced guest and mask policy enforcement in dormitories. My heart gave a little skip. This was it, the grand payoff. The email stated, clearly and unequivocally, that due to recent anonymous complaints regarding unauthorized guests and mask noncompliance in common areas, the university would be implementing stricter enforcement measures. From that day forward, the RA and security staff would be actively checking IDs of unfamiliar individuals in the dorm hallways and common areas to ensure they were registered students. Furthermore, mask compliance would be strictly enforced, with disciplinary action for repeat offenders. The email ended with a stern reminder of the university's commitment to student safety and community well-being. I reread the email, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across my face. It was perfect. My complaint, carefully crafted to sound like a legitimate concern, had hit its mark. It wasn't about me anymore, it was about policy. It wasn't about subjective, inappropriate dressing. It was about objective, unauthorized guests and mask noncompliance. I had used the system precisely as it was intended to address a genuine breach which Clara had unwittingly highlighted by her own hypocrisy. My role as the system enforcer had been quietly and effectively fulfilled. The vindication was immense, a quiet triumph that resonated deep within me. The immediate aftermath was swift and satisfying. The very next morning, as I walked through the hallway on my rounds, I saw a familiar scene. Clara's boyfriend, unmasked, was standing outside her door, laughing loudly. Just as I was about to pass, Maya the Raw emerged from her office looking particularly determined. She spotted him, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice firm. "Sir, do you have a university ID? We're checking IDs for all non-residents in the dorm now." Clara's boyfriend's face paled. He stammered, looking at Clara, who had emerged from her room, a look of growing horror on her face. No, I don't," he mumbled. "I don't go here." Maya nodded, her expression grim. "Then I'm afraid you can't be in the dorm. Per university policy, non-student guests are not permitted. This is your first warning. If you're seen here again, we'll have to escalate to campus security and the student conduct office, which could result in consequences for your host." Her gaze flickered to Clara, who looked as if she'd been slapped. The boyfriend, visibly flustered, mumbled an apology and retreated, his usual swagger completely gone. Clara shot Maya a venomous look but said nothing. She couldn't. Maya was just enforcing the rules. My rules. The grand payoff was unfolding exactly as I had envisioned. Over the next few days, the change in the dorm was palpable. Clara's boyfriend was conspicuously absent. The hallways, once casually unmasked, saw a noticeable increase in mask compliance. Students who usually walked around barefaced now adjusted their masks, an unspoken acknowledgement of the new, stricter enforcement. Clara herself seemed subdued, her usual smug demeanor replaced by a sullen pout. I would occasionally see her walking alone or with just one friend, her usual entourage thinned. The giggling had stopped. The pointed stares at my chest were gone. The consequences for Clara were not direct disciplinary action against her, which was never my goal. My goal was to leverage the system to expose her hypocrisy and inconvenience her directly, mirroring the inconvenience she had caused me. Her boyfriend's absence was a direct consequence of her own disregard for rules, brought to light by my legitimate complaint. She had wanted to control what I wore, now she couldn't control who she could have in her dorm. The poetic justice of it was immensely satisfying. I had not sought petty revenge, I had enforced fairness. I was the unwitting catalyst of justice, simply doing my job but doing it with a precise strategic intent born of deep-seated principle. In the quiet of my office, a week after the Roz email, I reflected on the events. I hadn't reveled in Clara's misery. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of balance restored. My methodical nature ensured that I viewed it not as a personal victory, but as a rectification of a systemic imbalance. The system had been weaponized, and I, a system enforcer, had used its own mechanisms to re-establish order. True peace for me was found in knowing that the rules were being applied fairly, regardless of who was involved. A final, subtle twist emerged a few weeks later. Maya the Raw stopped by my office, a respectful look on her face. "Brenna," she said, "I just wanted to thank you for how you handle things. You're always so perceptive. Those anonymous complaints about guests in masks really helped us crack down on an issue we knew was happening but couldn't quite get a handle on. It's made the dorm feel safer, honestly, more accountable." I smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Just doing my job, Maya," I replied, my voice calm and professional, but inside I knew I had done more than my job, I had redefined it. I had shown that upholding the rules, even quietly, could be the most powerful form of justice, and in doing so, I had reaffirmed my own convictions. The emotional journey had culminated not in vengeful glare, but in deep, quiet vindication. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.